Hello, Algebra 1 class. We're going to be practicing solving quadratic equations using the most efficient method and rounding any of our solutions to the nearest hundredth if necessary. So we're going to focus on, remember, 3 of the quadratic equation solving methods that are the most efficient ways to solve any quadratic equation. So we're going to take a look at factoring and taking the square root, and if those methods don't work, we would defer to the quadratic formula. So our first sample here, we're given the quadratic equation 3x squared plus 11x plus 10 equals 0. So we're considering either factoring or taking the square root, and we're going to choose factoring in this case because this is an equation that easily factors into the product of two binomials. We would consider just for a moment taking the square root, but would reject that method just as quickly because we see both x squared and x terms. So factoring is going to be the method of choice, and so we use our x method here to factor this equation into 3x plus 5 times x plus 2 equals 0. We're noticing the 3x times x is our 3x squared, or outside 3x times 2, 6x, plus our inside 5x will give us the 11x that we need, and positive 5 times positive 2 is positive 10. Once we are in factored form, we set each factor equal to 0 and solve each of those equations individually, and we'll arrive at our solutions. X is equal to negative 5/3 or x is equal to negative 2. And the way we get those two solutions, 3x plus 5 is equal to 0. Subtract 5 on both sides, divide both sides by 3, and x is negative 5/3. Over here, we'll set this factor equal to 0, x plus 2 equals 0, subtract 2 on both sides, and we'll arrive at x is equal to negative 2. All right, our next sample presents us with the equation negative x squared minus 3x plus 7 equals 0, and we'll consider factoring for a moment to see if it works. We have a quadratic trinomial here, and so we'll set up factoring as a possibility, but we'll quickly realize that factoring will not work here. Our 7x and our 1x cannot add or subtract to make this 3x, so we reject factoring, and we also reject taking the square root because we have both x squared and x terms. So the quadratic formula will be the most efficient method here, and so we will plug in our a, our b, and our c to the quadratic formula. X equals the opposite of b, and since b is negative 3, we'll write 3 here for the opposite of b, plus or minus the square root of b squared. That's negative 3 squared for our b squared, minus 4ac. Our a is negative 1, our c is 7, all over 2a, 2 times negative 1 for our a. All right, notice that we do have this fraction bar all the way across, and so we're going to make sure that we will be evaluating anything in our numerator here first before we would divide by that denominator. So that fraction bar stays nice and long as we simplify our equation so that we are going in the correct order when we are finally evaluating the expressions that will result in our solutions to this quadratic equation. So the first thing we're going to do is inside the radical, negative 3 squared is 9. Negative 4 times negative 1 times 7 is positive 28, so we're going to add 28. And in the denominator, 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. We're going to just bring that 3 down with the plus minus. We're still going to simplify in a radical. 9 plus 28 is 37. So now we're to the point in our solution where we want to break this fraction apart into 2 separate fractions to evaluate to find our final solutions. So again, notice this fraction bar goes all the way across. So we're going to want to make sure that we take 3 plus the square root of 37 and 3 minus the square root of 37, finding out what those values are before we divide by negative 2. All right, so here we are pulling this fraction apart into the 2 separate equations. Once we have the 2 fractions that we're going to evaluate, we'll plug into our calculator the square root of 37, and we find it's approximately 6.02. And then we're going to add 3 plus 6.02 first and then divide by negative 2. And on our calculator, we'll see negative 4.541, rounding off to our nearest hundredth. That will give us negative 4.54. And over here, 3 minus the square root of 37, we will rewrite as 3 minus 6.02, divide that by negative 2, and we'll have 1.541 on our calculator, and we'll round that off to 1.54. All right, that completes our samples for this lesson. And, oh, no, it doesn't. We have one more sample. I'm sorry. So our last sample, 3x squared equals 48. So in this particular equation, we're going to want to take the square root for our method. We don't see any x terms. We only see x squared. So this is a great equation to solve by taking the square root. First, isolate the x squared by dividing both sides by 3. That gives us x squared equals 16. Then take the square root of both sides, and we're going to get both a positive and a negative root. And so the square root of x squared is x, and the square root of 16 is 4. And of course, we have both a positive and a negative 4. So notice as we take the square root of 16, that radical will disappear, and we will report our answer as x is equal to positive or negative 4. All right, that does complete our samples for this lesson. And so now it's time to make sure you have this recorded in your lesson work, and then proceed on to the quiz when you are ready. And we'll see you next time.